Well, good evening. Back after what we would call the summer break. Yeah, I was a bit late this year having my holiday, so I've been away for a couple of weeks. Had a fantastic time, to be fair, but of course, meant I couldn't do much of these, if any at all, of these interviews. And I have to say, we're back with a bang because what a great artist I've got in store for you tonight. I've been doing Flux exhibitions for, I think I've done 5 or 6 now, and Janet is one of those artists that I met on my very first one, and a very kind-hearted artist she is too, because as you all know, and can tell, I can talk for England. And one exhibition, Janet came up to me with a bottle of water and said, "Gary, for God's sake, have a drink." So yes, we will get into her. And the best way of doing that, of course, is the video that I always create of everybody's work. Before I do that, a little bit of news on Flux, which is also coming up. We will be having the Christmas Flux. It will be in London. It's a smaller venue, smaller number of artists. It's a pop-up exhibition in, I think, is Great Titchfield Street, unless the venue has changed. But I know Lisa will give me a bit more information on that as we get closer, and I'll be able to share that with all of you as well. So let's kick off with the artist. Now, this talk is about obviously about Janet's work, but it's also about the fact that faces and how we recognize people, from the millions of people on the planet, how we can recognize people from their facial features. We've all got 2 eyes, a nose and a mouth, and 2 ears, if we're lucky enough to have all of that. Of course, some people are not, but you recognize somebody. And so how much of those facial features do we need to be able to recognize someone? And that forms the basis of Janet's art, as I understand it. And Janet and I have spoken long into the night at Flux talking about this, and I found it extremely fascinating. She is a psychologist. We'll get into that a bit as well, but let's kick off with showing you the kind of work that Janet does. So there you go. Promised you it was going to be good, and it certainly is. Really quite interesting work. And so let's welcome Janet to the show. Hello.
Hello. Hello.
Well,
and thank you so much. Such a lovely video, and I love the music.
Oh, good. Oh, good. We had a little discussion about that last night. It was going to be a bit rocky, but we decided, I eventually decided that actually that music probably fitted much better than anything. So, look, I want to get straight in because we'll get all the stuff about you and how you got into art out the way, and then we can jump right into this face stuff. So, first of all, we've had a chat about this before because art wasn't the thing that you kicked off with. You psychology is the bit that you came to. But so how did you? What's been your path to getting towards the
Okay,
art?
it's been a bit of a windy path, to be honest. I actually did try to start with art. Art was my
Ah,
favourite subject at school.
mhm.
I didn't stay at school for A levels. I left when I was 16, and I actually went to art college briefly. It wasn't a success, I have to say. I think I was there for about 8 months, and I was doing a diploma in general art and design, and I didn't get on with it very well. I think partly I was not really quite mature enough to make it work, and partly it wasn't the right course for me, and I ended up leaving. And then having a whole chain of different jobs and a very busy looking CV until I had a family. I had children, late 80s, early 90s. And then I actually went back to studying then and did my degree full time, rather stupidly, while my children were tiny. So
Well,
that was the beginning of the psychology. So um, I qualified in cognitive science in, I think, mid 90s, 1995. Then went on to do a master's, and then after that, got into teaching. So I taught psychology for many years at a school and then a sixth form college where I lived in Hertfordshire. And also, art and photography had been a hobby, a lifelong hobby, really. And at some point, I managed to convince the principal of my sixth form college to let me start teaching art and photography as well as psychology. And I went off and did a bit of, updating with my training so that I could do that confidently. Um, and yeah, then I continued to teach both photography and psychology A levels for a good few years after that. But I think an interesting thing happened. Because of my teaching photography, there was a requirement that for the specification I was teaching for A level, there was a requirement to encourage my students to very much incorporate manual elements into their photography. So, not just digital or darkroom photography, but painting onto photos or stitching into photos or burning them or, all sorts of interesting things we had to encourage them to do. And I think ultimately that rekindled my interest in art, particularly, not just photography. And I think thereby influenced the kind of art I then started making, because it's the things that I make are very much have digital and manual components. So I think that's where that started, if that makes sense.
it does make sense, and it's very interesting that you've managed to kind of link the two. You've managed to actually incorporate sort of the your psychology background into your art in some quite amazing way, really. And and that was one of the reasons why I really wanted to have you on, is to talk about that aspect of it, because as I said, we've spoken about it loads, and find it really quite fascinating. I said in my intro, the fact that you can actually recognize somebody out of millions of people on the planet just from their facial features. And it's also something to point out with people that have watched the video just now, and also the ones we're going to talk about, is that these these are faces you've created. They're not you haven't had a model sitting there or do anything else. These are faces that you've created. So initial concepts that informed the pieces, what was that concept? Where did that come from?
Well, I would say that when I first started making those pieces, I didn't necessarily, well, I definitely didn't have that idea of facial perception in mind. When I started making the pieces, I was very interested in ambiguity, different ways of viewing the same things. So, two sides to a story, multiple ways to understand a conversation, many ways to interpret an artwork. I was particularly interested in the two sides of the human brain, left and right hemispheres, and therefore the two different types of processing, of cognitive processing in the brain. And particularly, I was interested in how there could be a mismatch between how someone feels inside, what their existence is like from within, and how they might be perceived by others. So I guess dichotomies in general, really, if that makes sense. So that was the initial sort of general idea of conceptual elements.
And I know, yeah, well, it does. And I know that this, I mean, this image is sitting behind you, but it's also the first sort of one that started it all off, is as far as I understand, which is
yes,
this one. I'm going to put
this
us to
one.
the side so that people can see us. Yeah, this one. So once you'd started down this route,
Yes.
did that sort of get you?
How did it happen?
Well, how did it happen? And B, I ask this question of pretty much every artist I interview. Where's the color palette come from?
Right, okay. Well, it might be helpful for that if I tell you kind of what my general process is and how this process started. I'll be brief on that.
Yeah.
But most of the pieces I'm making at the moment start with a digital image, and I actually get that image printed on canvas, and then I stretch that canvas myself onto a frame, and then I paint over the top of it. So it's very much digital image and painted image at once. So it's a bit like starting with a face and then putting makeup on it, or adorning it in various ways afterwards. But some of them are 50-50 digital and manual. Some they could be different. So, but they all involve both basically. The color palette. I have become very aware that I'm a big fan of bright colour, not too much of it in one place, and I'm a big fan of black and white. And I don't really tend to get drawn to much in between. I'm not a fan of beige. I'm not a fan of pastel colours, pale colours. I can't help it. That's, I think I was born like that. I love bright colour and I love black and white. So I think it's the boldness, really. How do I choose them? It's actually very difficult to describe that verbally, because I start nearly always with an image that hasn't got much colour in it. It might be, just shades of white, black, and grey. And as I'm building the image, I start to sort of intuitively feel what colours I feel it needs to be. So not much help really.
No. So take this one for example. So
Yeah.
Why was this your starting point?
Why was this my starting point? This was, I think, after I'd been trying to analyse faces. Now, I must admit, when I first started doing this, I wasn't building my own faces. This one I did build from scratch myself. But what I started off doing, I think I may have talked to you about this at Flux, I was looking at existing images of faces. So I might look at a photograph, an image in a magazine, anything, photo of a family member. And I was then looking at that photograph in Photoshop and minimizing it using something like a cutout filter to really simplify what was in the image. And then I was looking right into the sort of detail of the pixels, into an eye or a nostril or a mouth, for example, and then kind of noting how it was composed when you're really right up close in the pixels. And after sort of playing around with the shapes and the lines and observing what happened when you zoom in, basically, I then started kind of reversing that process and creating my own features. So kind of doing the process in reverse, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I can, okay, so I've not spoken to you about your process at all, actually, at Flux or anywhere else. So that I find that really quite fascinating how you did that. But what observations were that effectively influenced, the way? Do you look at the way that people stand, people way they hold their face, the contours of their face? Are you looking at that before you get to the point where you start putting a face together, or is this something that you just see?
Yes, it is definitely something that just kind of comes to be. If I have many times tried to plan what's going to happen. It doesn't seem to work for me. I would like to say that it did, but it doesn't. It's very much experimentation and fiddling with things in real time until I like the look of them. So all those lines that you can see, if you're looking, like say this picture you've got up on the screen at the moment, if you're looking at the the different areas of grey and various shades and white and black, you can see that they're really quite simple, those lines and shapes, and there aren't very many different colours.
They are, but what I do notice, and look, anybody watching, give this a try. If you half close your eyes, all of those tones blend to give you effectively a 3D image. Now, again, this was hugely evident at Flux, because, and I'll show a little video. I'm have to see if I can get the sound not to work, but I will show a little video at the end where I'm walking back with the camera. I am having a conversation with somebody at the time, so it's not great, but I am walking back with the camera. The artist in question runs through with a glass of wine. We won't talk about that. But as you walk away from it, they become 3D, and you can get that by half closing your eyes. You can see how it blends in, which, given that you are creating it from your own imagination, it's quite remarkable how you manage to get those grey areas to actually, when you then half close your eyes, they do blend, and it gives you that 3D image. That's got to be something that is inbuilt in you. It must be in your eye already.
So actually, Simon, my husband, who I think you met, he was that first piece I did. He was watching me do it when I was having my first attempt at kind of reversing the process, having examined an awful lot how simple an eye could be, reduced to in a photograph. I was then trying to make my own, sort of draw my own contours for a cheek or a nostril or an eye or an eyebrow. And I was saying to him, this isn't going to work. This is going to be one of these things that just does not work backwards. And we were both actually quite surprised at how successful it was. It wasn't great. I did get better, but I found that, as with anything, it's exposure. After looking at and examining an awful lot of eyes that you've reduced and used filters on, you get used to the kind of shapes that you can make. And then you look at the face that you've made, and I'd sit back and say, right, okay, that doesn't look quite right. But obviously with Photoshop, you've got so many tools where you can warp things and change distances and lines. So I very much play with it intuitively until it looks like the face I want it to look.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that's in itself, that's remarkable, because especially if you look at this one, let's just make this a bit bigger. Especially look at this one and half close your eyes. You've got the shadow from the nose in that same contour lines.
Yeah,
That when you half close your eyes, sits perfectly. I mean, it's quite, it's really,
it
forgive me,
is quite weird, isn't
really
it?
bloody clever. It's very clever. Yeah, it's weird. And as you, I think there was one that you had at Flux at Piccadilly last Christmas that uh, as you walked away from it, it started going up the stairs. It kind of followed you around the room. It was one of those, whoa, there's a, and people were coming down just to look at that aspect of it.
Oh, wow, lovely.
Yeah, which is quite amazing actually. It's quite and again, I can see your bold colours jumping out. And
Mm.
what's the significance of the metallic elements that you're putting into these pictures?
Oh, well, that's I think it relates to masks. Um, Also, going back to what I was describing at the beginning when you're asking about concepts, it's a slight nod to ambiguity and the potential for seeing things in different ways. Also, sometimes a slight nod to left and right hemispheres of the brain, but that's being a bit too specific. It's hard to articulate, but I guess it's very much about a dichotomy and two totally opposing ways of seeing something, and always being aware that there might be another viewpoint or another style of processing or another approach.
So the other thing that I always say is that when artists do exhibitions, you cannot just let the art do the talking. You've got to do the talking. And what's
Mm.
really, I feel, important with your work in particular is that you do the talking about it, because first off, most people would think these are models. That's number one. But also to describe what you've just described about the metallic elements, masks, the fact that they could be left and right. I know that's, as you just said, a little bit too specific, but there's very quite deep meaning that's sitting behind the mask,
Yes.
which is really, and I think, I don't know, or I haven't found anybody else doing this, and that makes you unique. I haven't found anybody else doing it at all, and I have looked, and I think that's what sets some artists at Flux. It sets them apart, because you can go to a lot of sort of exhibitions and see loads of things the same, but you can go to Flux and you can see quite a lot of stuff that is, wow, I haven't seen that before. That's amazing. How do you do that? And actually talking to people about your process is quite an important, for me,
Mm.
an
Mm.
important part of what you do. And so this then leads on to how much of the human face needs to be there
Mm.
before somebody recognizes it as a face. I mean, I
Yes.
touched on this at the beginning. We've, two eyes,
Yes.
a mouth, pair of ears,
Yeah.
hair or no hair, whichever. Uh,
It
but
is. It is something that I have. I mean, I know a little bit. I'm not an expert on facial recognition. I can, for anyone who's actually interested in that, I can give a very good recommendation later on if you're interested. But I would say the quantity of information needed to perceive a face or recognize a face. My interest with these pictures is how much can I actually reduce an image of a face to basics before a person can no longer be recognized, or perhaps be distinguishable from others, because obviously there's a difference between recognizing that something is a human face and distinguishing it from other human faces. But I was thinking about how we can know that we've seen a face before. We're often racking our brains to remember where, even despite the fact that most people have very similar facial features, as you mentioned, 2 eyes, nose and mouth, eyebrows, etc. But it seems amazing that we can distinguish between and recognize so many faces when these basic face characteristics are shared across the globe by billions of people. On the one hand, then, we must necessarily need an enormous amount of information in order to recognize a particular individual and see them as distinguishable from everyone else.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we seem to be able to reduce the information in a facial image to a surprising level while still being able to recognize the owner. So if distinction and recognition is still possible after whatever level of reduction, then the elements that are helpful in such a task must surely still be present in the reduced image. And that's one of the things that made my mind boggle. So thinking about it from a sort of necessary and sufficient viewpoint is very inspiring and interesting, because the question would be, where is the point that you've got enough information but not too much? So where is that fine line? Could we go on?
Well, there's another point I'm going to make here, which
please do.
you've got the recognition part and how much of a face needs to be there for you to recognize it as a face. But there's another aspect of this that I would see as well, which is how much of the face needs to be there before you recognize an emotion.
Yeah.
So, and that's also evident in what you're doing, is that it's showing us that there's an emotion behind it. And it might be that whether it's the eyes, eyes, in my work, eyes sell pictures, because if you're doing a portrait of somebody, then the first thing that draws you in will be the eyes. So, and eyes convey emotion as well as anything else. So the eyes are really quite an important part. And I can see that actually is the case with what you're doing. But there will come a point. I mean, take this one that we've got on the screen at the moment. Again, half close your eyes, you get that 3D look as if you're standing back from it. But to me, there's a very definite left and right because of what you've done with the hair. So, and that also looks to me of, and this is me looking at it and my interpretation, obviously, but that's one side is conveying a different emotion to the other.
Yes. Yeah. And this piece is called Dance with Your Demons.
Yeah.
And so I think again, I find it quite tricky to articulate in words, but yes, there were two different moods going on there, or perhaps two different approaches one could take to a particular emotion or mood. It could be about taking a different twist on something, embracing an emotion, running with it, not necessarily suppressing it. If you've got some demons, don't shut the door on them, dance with them, see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm being flippant, but you get the idea.
Well, you are sort of, but you're not really. You're explaining exactly. I mean, I've come to the conclusion I have looking at the picture. Other people will come to different conclusions, because we all know that art can mean different things to different people. But I find it quite amazing how just that one image can convey that emotion. It can convey, the dancing with the devil thing. This comes back to another point I always make as well. How important is the title? And the title, if getting the title right, means that there doesn't need to be a monstrous amount of explanation in terms of
Mm.
what the picture's trying to convey. But I often find sometimes that you see a title and quite a lot of people just can't get it. They
Mm.
can't get it from the title because the title's not really good enough. And I think the title should be part of the story. It should be part of the picture. It's
I
an
think you're
integral part.
right. I think it's important. And actually, I used to find it very difficult to come up with names at all. But what I now find I do, I didn't really plan to do this. I just realised now in retrospect, this is what I always do. When a piece is finished, I haven't got the words of the title in my mind by that point. I've got a feeling in my mind. I've got a feeling and something that I want to portray and something that I'm imagining right from the beginning, but it doesn't have a label. And then when I've finished, sometimes I will know by then what the name's going to be. But if I don't, I will literally sit there and stare at the picture and try to convert the feeling into some suitable words. It's that simple.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, it's interesting to me because obviously I've spoken to you the way that I work, and I see the image completely finished in my head, but I'm telling a story. So I
Yeah.
obviously I know what the title is going to be because it's part of the story, and therefore the picture speaks for itself in that respect. But here, you're that's interesting because the title, if you know what you're trying to convey when you put this together in
Mm,
your mind, you're putting it all together. Therefore, the standing and staring at it and thinking, right, what am I going to call this? That will come because you've had all that time
yes.
putting that picture together. It will actually form in your brain. This next one, the last one that we're going to look at in terms of this, because I've got one more I want to talk about after this. But this reminds me of the other conversation we had, which is the frozen experiment.
Oh, yes.
So
The frozen blue face.
let me just pop that pop that.
I'd never noticed that, Gary. I can see what you mean completely, that could
Yeah,
remind
this
you
is
of
what
it.
it reminds me
I
of it.
can. Yeah.
Uh, let me just bring this. So just talk about this frozen experiment because
The frozen
that,
experiment.
when we
Okay.
started talking about that, that just it sums up what you're trying to do, but it also made me think about things completely differently when you spoke about the frozen experiment.
Yeah, it's funny because that was actually that wasn't recently near any of this current work at all. It was a few years ago, but
Mm,
um, I was sort of I think I was thinking about the same sort of concepts. What's necessary and sufficient when at what point do we stop recognizing something as the entity it is if it's deteriorating. And I was at that time actually interested in masks, and I was doing a lot of drawing on masks and photographing them and playing around with digital images and that kind of thing. But the funny thing is, it was actually the packaging of a mask. Um, these kind of little kids' masks that you can get in the shops, very cheap and cheerful. And the packaging is like a sort of see-through piece of hard plastic that's also a mask shape.
yeah,
So I was interested in that rather than the mask itself. And I literally cut it out from the packaging. And I decided I wanted to make some sort of ice frozen face. And so that I could actually see it a bit better, I put some food colouring in it. So I filled the mask packet with water, added some blue food colouring, put it into the freezer. I had to wait quite a long time, I have to say, because it was quite a large ice cube, if you like. Um, but what I was interested in doing, and which did prove to be very interesting, was I put my pride and joy, discarded the plastic, put the ice face on a white plate, and sort of sat and watched it for a little while. I'd have been there for a long time if I'd been watching it melt. But I took photographs of it. I think I can't remember now exactly, because it was whatever intermittent period I chose was more to do with when it was actually changing. But what I was interested in, as you can imagine, is at what point it ceased to be recognisable by me anyway, not a very large sample, but by me at the time, as a face or as a mask. And it was fascinating because it remained quite obviously a mask. I mean, clearly we're talking about a face with almost no features, very, very simple. But it remained obviously a mask for a very long time until it finally disintegrated into its last 3 blobs or whatever. But it was just fascinating and really made me think more about it's about where the line is. That was the bit that I was always interested in. Where is that line? Where is the point where something ceases to be recognisable as the entity it is?
It's interesting because that's just made me think. If there were 2 bits of coal and a carrot on the floor in winter, you would instantly know that had been a snowman.
Yes.
So isn't it interesting how you can it would be great to know how many photographs you took before it could no longer be recognized as a face.
Mm.
And then at what point? I mean, if you were to do that again now, years later, especially with the work that you're doing as well, it would be very interesting to know, right, at what point could I get to, and then could I turn that back into one of your pictures and see if by converting it into a picture, it still is recognizable as a face.
Well, I've thought about possibly doing that in the future with a digital image as well, because I could, if I really were interested in joining the art and the psychology together, I could design some kind of experiment where continue to simplify all the contours and the lines in a digital image of a face, and see at what point. Well, it could be looking to see whether people could still recognise faces they knew, or it could be looking to see whether they could distinguish faces from others. I mean, it would need some thinking about, but it would be an interesting line of inquiry.
Yes, it would. It would. I think that's something that I would say there's got to be, that's been in your mind for a long time before you started doing this work, but it must have been sitting there at some point, because to come up with what you do now, you haven't just pulled that out the air.
Well, I don't know. I do actually feel that it's mostly a coincidence, only because, well, in a way, yes, because I would say if there were areas of psychology that had influenced my art, that would never have been one that I would have thought of. Right. I would have said things like, left and right hemisphere of the brain, holistic processing versus linear sequential thinking, neurodiversity, different types of people, attention. There are so many things that I'm interested in, how people present themselves, how people are misunderstood, ambiguity. I could never have predicted that this would be, a line of interest at all. But I think that really happened through observation, my observations and other people's observations after I'd made some of these pieces, because quite interesting, really. It was more the people that were viewing them were saying to me, especially after a couple of the Flux exhibitions, people were going and standing further away, coming closer to the pieces and saying, this is really, really interesting, because when I'm standing in front of the picture, it looks flat, two-dimensional, and actually it doesn't really particularly look like a face, because I'm just looking at a few blobs of grey, black and white, and then go across the room and it suddenly takes on this 3D form and I can see a face. And so I started thinking about what the human brain does. We obviously, our brain, we don't work the same as a camera. We've got interpretation going on in here. And when we look at things, we add our knowledge and we add all sorts of things into the interpretation and, perception of what we sense something that's actually there, but our perception is informed by things that our brains know, and we add all sorts of information in.
Yeah, which is kind of what I was getting at when I was talking about earlier about the emotion that's added, but it's not evident. It's the emotion's there because of the way that you can look at the picture, and when you move back, you see it, but it's not initially evident, because first thing you see is a face. But when you start to move back and look at it, then you see, oh, hold on, there's much more. And it comes back to that, those eyes are following me around the room. That, especially
people say to me often things like, 2 or 3 different people said this to me in almost the same words. They said, the thing that I've noticed all the pieces have in common is that they're looking through you and not at you. They're sort of looking straight through you. And it's interesting when people say things that you haven't necessarily noticed or intended yourself, but I decided that was definitely right.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like, look, I know I've done absolutely nothing wrong, but that is making me feel really guilty. It's like, it's that kind of, God, blimey, I can't.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
When you're in the spotlight, you're guilty as hell. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
I'm gonna hold on 1 second. I'm gonna try and I don't know if I can do this, but I think I can. So I'm gonna pull this back. I'm going to shut the sound down because it's me talking basically. But I did this. I took this at Flux, and this is where your work was on the wall, and we were saying to people, look, walk backwards, and this is exactly what I did here. And excuse the over in a bit, but I am walking backwards away, and look how they suddenly pop out of the wall. And you'll see, yes, look, I've got a glass of wine, and I've realised that Gary is filming, and I need to get out of the way quick. But can you see now? If let's stop that there, and look how from a distance now. Look how. Let's go. Let's bring that along. Look how they are absolutely jumping off the wall, and every single one of them's got a different look. It's got a real sense of power actually to each image. And I wanted to show this because that is one thing. Let's sort of come back to the beginning a bit and move it along. You can see, look how that starts to, just as we get in, and I'm not that far away actually. I'm only about 10 or 12 feet away from it at this point. But look how they really start to come alive. And I think that's the special thing about your ability to be able to do that, working with contours, essentially.
I tell you what can actually be quite weird is sometimes I'm working on quite a small laptop. This is actually quite funny. Quite a small screen. I can get so involved in the detail that I've literally zoomed in more times than I can count, and I'm working at the pixel level, and I'm smoothing off a line, or I'm deciding I want this to be slightly different. Sometimes I have fallen about laughing when I've zoomed out because I realise I'm actually working so small there is nothing about the change I've just made visible to the human eye when you look at the
Yeah,
picture at all.
yeah.
I don't know if that happens to you, but it's quite
Does happen to me, yeah.
entertaining. And I just realised, I've just wasted the last half an hour, and then no one can see the difference.
No, I know, but what I find it is that it's there.
Yes, quite.
And
Yes,
that's what it
it's there.
is. You actually
Yeah,
know it's there, and I think
yeah,
that's what makes the difference for me. You know that is there, and therefore, um, no, look, nobody will probably see it. And I have the other thing, and I've said this before, that your eyes get used to the work that you're working on.
mm,
You do have to take a break and go away, and when you come back and you go, what is that? You know,
absolutely. Yeah,
you have to do that. It's same as if you're mixing some music. Your ears become used to it, and when you take them off, go and have a cup of tea, walk around the garden. When you come back and put the headphones back
yes,
on, you hear
need,
stuff that you thought, "Whoa, what's that? How was that doing there?" So
yeah.
it's quite
I
a
think that's interesting you said that, because I think that is another example of our ability to just adapt to
mm,
and accommodate whatever becomes normal, whatever we're familiar with, whether it's something good or something bad. Human beings are so geared to adaptation and to
mm.
adapt quickly so that it becomes the norm. And you're right, you need fresh eyes on something, don't you? Fresh eyes, fresh ears, whatever.
You do. Now, talking of music, this is a bit of a different one. So
Yes, it
let's have a
is.
little chat about this, because it's not a face, it's not anything.
No.
What's the background behind this image?
Yeah, good question. It's it is a good question. I think, I mean, it's a little bit shallow, really. It's I love music. I can't read music. I love music. I love guitars. I love the look of guitars and the shape of a guitar. I think I've got quite a few of these, quite a lot of them, and they're slightly older than the faces and the masks. But when I started making them, I made quite a lot of them, and they were very popular. So I did sell quite a few of them,
Mm.
and there's something that I very much like making, but it's almost a bit of a guilty pleasure. It's sort of when I don't want to think, I still make them, but when I don't want to think too hard about deep and meaningful concepts, if I want to, I can just sit there and paint a pretty guitar. That's really the truth.
Yeah, but there is still the metallic elements.
Yes,
So
I'm a
you've
bit of a
definitely got
magpie.
you've got a thing about them
I have,
metallic
I
elements,
have.
which
I
but look, I think even if you weren't doing faces, even if you weren't doing this, they're the sorts of things where people go, "Oh, I bet that's a Janet Cawthorne." That's the sort of thing you've got. This is the thing for me with artists. Artists have to have their thing,
mm,
because then
mm.
people know who they are. That's the crux of it.
I mean,
Uh,
that particular one's got a little too much gold on it for my liking now. It's quite old now, but it is interesting when um, I've had, I think, two now solo exhibitions in Brighton down on the seafront. On the seafront, there's an area called the Fishing Quarter in Brighton, and it's a lovely community. It's got, a cafe, a fresh fish shop, a museum, lots of boats outside. If you're familiar with Brighton, you'd probably recognise the description. There's several arches in a row, boats out the front, and it's a lovely place, and it's a community where everybody knows each other and works together. And one of those arches is rented out as a gallery, and I've had probably 3 or 4 exhibitions I've done there, but only 2 of them have been solo in the last year. So that was actually the first time that I saw a lot of my work on the walls together, because obviously when you're doing a bigger exhibition, lovely though it is, you're sharing the walls with lots of other people, which actually I love. But yeah, it was the first time I'd seen all of it together, and it was a bit like that. I felt that my work was all a bit sporadic and disjointed, and didn't really have a category. And then realised more recently, actually it does now. And actually the funny thing is, even the older pieces, you can tell are mine. And people would say that when they came in, they could tell it was, and that was such a relief to me, because that was something that I didn't used to feel. And I thought, oh, when I put all my work together in one room, it's going to be terrifying, because it's going to look like a hodgepodge of all sorts of stuff. But it didn't, and I think you're right. I think the metallic elements definitely do something to contribute to that.
There is something about when someone says to you, and I actually had it while I was away. Somebody did actually say to me, "Sorry, what was your name?" And I say, after I've been talking about what I do art-wise, and they go, "Oh my God, yeah, I know your stuff. You're the steampunk man."
Oh,
You know,
really?
yeah,
Right.
and so that kind of I don't know. There's a little bit that makes you think, yeah, perhaps I am actually making a bit of a mark. People do know who I am and what
Yeah.
I do, and it's the same. It's the same with you. You can walk into Flux and see your section. Everybody will know that is you,
Mm,
because, as I've said, no one else is doing it, and
mm,
it's quite. I think it's important. There's two things I say about doing the same exhibition. Is people that are buying your work need to know you're still going to be here next year.
mm,
They
mm,
want to know that you're in it for the long haul, and they're going to invest in you and buy your work. They're going to hang it on the wall, and they know that other people are doing the same, as opposed to, oh, I just churned this out last week. I've sold it
mm,
all, and I'm going to go and do
mm,
something else next week completely. It's giving people confidence in you and your reputation, basically. And I think part of that, for sure, is actually um, your style and setting your mark. I am Janet Cawthorne. This is my work, and you do that. Without question, you do that, and also what I also find again with certainly with the artists at Flux in particular, because that's really the main exhibition that I do, is everybody's just so nice.
yeah.
We all look after each other, and I find that actually with a lot of artists, everybody are genuinely nice people. You
Mm,
don't get any people sort of kicking off because for all silly reasons. It's if you haven't got something. Paolo said something to me which is quite funny. So somebody was going to buy one of my pieces at Flux, but his wife she wasn't having any of it. And Paolo said to me, "Gary, you need some chocolate. You need some chocolate. You need to get some chocolate, and you need to uh, s- give the wife some chocolate. She'll be right." So we were having a laugh about it. About half an hour later, he comes back with a box of Quality Street. He says to me, "Have this beside your stand, and the next time you're in trouble, offer them a chocolate."
I
But
just
I just,
say,
I
oh,
just thought that is so funny,
it
and
is funny. It is funny for many reasons.
yeah, but it's the psychology behind. Okay, I know the man wants to buy this picture, so
Mm.
actually my focus needs to be on his wife who's really not sure. And Paolo's just
And is a toffee going to make the difference?
but
Who knows?
Paolo's put a funny face on. Yeah, well, I don't know whether it makes a difference, but I think what he's basically getting at is it's not about the chocolate; it's about
Yeah.
focusing your attention on the right
Yes,
person.
I know what you
Yeah,
mean.
and that's
Yes,
what he's saying. That's
yes.
right, Gary. It's
To
focusing
be a
your
good
attention.
salesman, focus your
Yeah,
attention on where you can make a difference, not where you've
yeah,
already won. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, and that's the point he's making. It wasn't really
Mm,
about the chocolate. He just went off and got the chocolates and came back. Basically to say, look, I know we've made a joke of it. This is the joke. but the truth is, yeah, focus on the where you see it. And he does watch every week, and he loves your work. Of course, he does.
Oh, how lovely.
And
Thank you, Paolo. That's really
yeah,
kind. Thank
he
you.
does. He watches. He watches every week because um, he's genuinely interested in what other artists do,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
what's behind their work. He's a God. Paolo's an amazing man. He does all sorts of stuff, and I believe he's in this next edition or current edition of the Flux magazine. Actually, there's a big interview in there. They call him the it's something wizard. You'll have to remind me, Paolo, what your the magic wizard or something like that they've given him, or something like that. He's got a name anyway. Given him a nickname because remember he at Flux he had that really colourful coat on, and
I
he
do
was going
remember,
around,
yes.
yeah, going
Yeah,
around talking to
yeah,
everybody. So I think that is it's really quite it's such a special environment for
it is.
artists.
It
But
is.
from my point of view, had I not gone and entered the first exhibition, the Wizard of Art. There you go. That's
Wizard
what the
of
word.
Art, right,
Yeah,
okay, yes.
they're calling him the Wizard of Art. Yeah.
Excellent.
So, but had I not been to that first exhibition, entered into the first exhibition, um, and also, in fact, how I started was that Lisa got in touch with me and said, "Look, I love your work. Would you like to be in a magazine? Let's do an interview." Blah blah blah. And then up came the exhibition. I put my work in, and had I not been to that first one and met everybody,
Mm,
I wouldn't be sitting here doing this. For number one, I wouldn't
no,
be
no,
sitting here talking to
exactly.
you, and
It's,
and
yeah.
also I wouldn't have all those people as friends.
Yes,
And
exactly, exactly. It's sometimes quite a difficult thing to explain to other people who aren't familiar with it, isn't it? Because it's, I say that, I say, well, it's fantastic, when we do it, and it's, there are so many positives to it. It's not, it's about showing the work, possibly selling the work, being part of a community, seeing all your artist friends is so enjoyable. And, I missed it so much when it didn't happen. Like, for example, during the
COVID,
pandemic, in the
yeah,
lockdowns,
yeah,
and I think what that led me to. By then, I think I'd probably done about 5 Flux exhibitions or something. I think I've done 9 now. So I think if I do the next one, whenever I do another one, it will be my 10th. And I find that really difficult to believe that there have been that many. But then I look back and think, all these friends I now have, all these people that I would consider actual friends in real life, not just people that I am friendly with when we go to Flux, people whose house I go and stay the weekend at, and proper friends. And it all, so much of it stems from that. And as you say, it's a very sort of mutually supportive environment. Really,
well,
really special.
it's a shame you don't still live in Hertfordshire because that's where I live. And in fact, I was talking to. I had to go to a meeting with my son this morning up in Leicester, and we were talking on the way there. And he said, "Oh, who are you interviewing tonight?" And I said it's a shame because if Janet and Simon still lived in Hertfordshire, they wouldn't be very far away. We were probably going out for a few beers, or
Where do
it,
you live? Where do you live
it,
in Hertfordshire?
in Welling.
Oh, Welling. That's right. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah, I
yeah.
remember. I
And
remember. Yeah.
in fact, also, funny enough, that's where Lisa's from. Funny enough,
Yes. Yes. I
originally.
did
Yeah,
know that. I did
yeah,
know that. Yeah.
originally. So it's obviously a very creative little area to live.
Well,
But, of
obviously.
course, yeah.
But when
Um,
you think about how many of us now at Flux Exhibition are friends, and
yeah,
how much
yeah.
everyone looks forward to seeing each other, it's quite amazing, because it's
It,
quite a large group. The people that are actually genuinely friends now, it is quite a large group, and it's wonderful.
it is, and it's also one of the reasons why I wanted to do this,
Mm,
and why I like doing it is because it's showcasing artists who you've got to jump through hoops to get any form of PR or anything like that.
mm,
And someone can watch this and sit down for an hour and really understand what your work is, so that the next time they come to an exhibition, they already know what you
So I
do,
think
how
that's
you do
actually a
it.
really good idea. It is a
Yeah,
really good idea.
and it's really, it's just that sort of showcase to say, look, for me, this is my work, but
Mm,
look at all these other people and what they do. You know, it's not, it's, I'm not selfish to the point where I just go, yeah, this is all about me, get
yeah,
lost.
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't do that. I'm interviewing you. I genuinely want to know about your work. So to that end, because we're our time's up, but um, what's next, and where will all your current ideas head to? What's the current
What's
ideas?
next?
Where they leading?
Um, I I do have a desire to perhaps get back into academia in some way or other, and perhaps do a little bit of psychology research. But um, I'm the sort of person that always wants to do far too many things and doesn't have enough time. So I've got to actually discipline myself to
Join the
focus
club.
on the priorities, of course. Um, but in terms of the art, I want to carry on doing what I'm doing, but I'm quite interested in experimenting with some larger scale pieces, firstly, and then also I think I'd like to experiment with making some pieces without any digital component, so completely manually. When we're talking about, I've got one here. Look, I can probably hold it. I can probably possibly hold it up. I don't know
Oh,
whether I'm lighting
wait a minute.
it. So if you look at again, you can see those sort of contours of grey and black and white, simple nostril, simple eyeball,
Yeah.
two blobs. But I would like to experiment by sort of cutting out and layering shapes and maybe doing some large scale collages or something like that on some
So
large pieces.
you're you basically do make them 3D, even though they are the contoured shapes that are coming
Yeah,
out. Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. That's pretty cool.
And I mean, it's got the sort of interesting psychology element to do with visual perception and depth perception and 3D to 2D and that kind of thing. But they will almost undoubtedly, the actual sort of appearance of the pieces, they will still be face oriented and mask oriented and
Yeah.
similar sort of concept and subjects for sure.
So it's um, there's another side to all this as well, which we touched on right at the beginning, which is left brain, right brain. And I
Mm,
know you can talk for another, we can have a whole new discussion about that. So what I'd like
yeah.
to do is
Mm,
probably early part of next year is get you back on. We'll have a whole big discussion and some examples of what we're talking about there uh, from that point of view as well, because that's a fascinating subject, especially how that links into art.
mm,
Because we've already when we were talking last night before this came on, we did both agree that we would probably have to try and keep it short, because if we carried on talking, we'd still be here past midnight. Um, but
mm-hmm,
um, but there was this whole thing that I said to you, look, I think of an image, I then I then know what that image is going to look like completely finished. But my real bit I love is how I get from there to the final piece, all the
mm,
elements I've got a photograph to put together, which means that I'm not left brain, right brain as such. I'm kind of, everything's going on at once in my head, which is probably why all my hair fell out, to be fair. Um, but
Just say
but
it's not
it,
quite that black and white, the whole right
no,
right left
no,
thing, but yeah, but we
no.
we can come to that. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why I'd really like to, because when you
Mm,
said that to me last night, I thought, okay, I really want to explore that more. And we've run out of time to do that on this show, which is a bit of a shame. But yes, definitely can have you back on, especially when you've got a whole new set of work that we can look at as well.
mm,
And I'm sure
mm,
there's people that have been watching and will watch this who will think exactly the same. But for now, Janet, I hope you've enjoyed that. I certainly have. I always learn things when I do these interviews, and once again, I've learned a lot. But thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure interviewing me, and as I said, interviewing me, no, interviewing
Interviewing
you.
me. I was going to say, was that
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
was that
I've just spoke.
intentional or
I've just
not?
I've just spoke to myself the whole night. God, seriously, I've had a bit of a week this week. I actually, going up the M1 this morning, I drove through Costa Coffee. Of course, you're supposed to stop and tell them what you want. Oh no, I carried on going. My son's going, "Where are you going?" I went
Well,
straight up to the.
at least you didn't mean the building when you said I drove through Costa Coffee. I was a little bit worried at first, but yeah.
No, I meant the drive-through,
Well,
and eventually I got to the opening, and the woman went, "I'm assuming you want a coffee." I went, "Yeah,
I'm
sorry."
assuming you know the coffee, or
Yeah.
perhaps you've had too much, sir.
Bit of a week. I've been in Belfast this week and Leicester this morning, and now rushing back to
Well, I
do
hope
this.
you
It's
hope
been
you get a
great.
good rest tonight
I'll do my
after
best.
having
But
your ears bent by me. Anyway, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for doing it. I think it's wonderful what you're doing, and
thank you.
you know,
Thanks very much. Thanks
yeah.
very much.
And
And it's
yes,
been a
I
pleasure.
have enjoyed it, and I'm now off to have a very large glass of wine. So
Yes. Well, yeah, and thanks.
dispense with the teacup. But yes, thanks
Yeah,
again. It's been really
yeah.
nice.
Thank you. I've been looking forward to this for quite some time, and I know you were quite nervous about coming on, but I really wanted to get you on and discuss the faces thing, and really what kicked it off, I suppose, was that frozen experiment. When we started talking about that, I
Mm,
thought, definitely got to get you
yes.
on. So,
We never got to talk about the lights on the bodysuits. That'll have to be another
oh
time.
no, we're bringing that
Yeah,
into the
we'll
next.
bring
Yeah,
it in
you're
next
right.
time.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
well, yes,
Well,
completely
thank you,
forgot about
Gary.
that.
It's been wonderful, and
Thanks very much.
yeah.
Hang on, just stay on for a couple of minutes afterwards. I'll just say goodbye to everybody, and we'll just have a.
Okay, okay, fine. Yeah, sure.
That'll be excellent.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Well, I did tell you. I did tell you it would be quite fascinating, and good God, Janet and I could talk forever because she is such an interesting person and how she comes to her art and what her art means and how she comes up with the ideas for the faces. I learned an awful lot tonight. I hope you did as well. Not entirely sure just yet who's going to be next week's guest. I keep having people. Suddenly I've got a commitment that's come up and I'm having to juggle people around, but I will be back next Thursday. At some point I will actually do one which is a lead in to the talk that I give everywhere, which is reality is for people with no imagination. I will do a little bit on that perhaps. If somebody drops out next time, I'll still be here because I love doing this. But thanks very much, and see you next week.